Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update. The first part there for the, well actually second part really, I've done a breaking news piece this morning, but the first proper one for the 23rd of September 2025. We're going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day. Before all the usual caveats apply, you can find them linked in the description below with any luck. We have personnel numbers over 1,000, which I think is a significant indication, as well as the vehicles and fuel tanks being over 100 at 123. So those two stats tell me that the Russians are still attacking in decent numbers. We also have 2 aircraft and 1 helicopter. That is the primary strikes that we saw yesterday morning. That was on the back of 3 helicopters being added to this list from the night before, which was the primary group again doing these very incisive strikes in Crimea. So we had 3 Mi-8s on the first night. They were added, so the evidence is clearly there for that. One assumes, I say clearly, one presumes the evidence is good enough for those to be added. And then 2 nights ago, the 2 B-12, are they? The Chaika, the amphibious seaplanes, essentially, struck on land because they can take off from the airbase as well. 2 of them and another Mi-8. So 4 Mi-8s taken out in 2 nights, and 2 large aircraft that are capable of sonar and reconnaissance over the Black Sea. Really good few days for particularly the primary group. They're incredible. I'd be piling in all my resources to those bad boys because they are striking the crap out of these radars and air defenses right across Crimea, and I think that precipitates then the ability to strike at other targets. So you take out the radars, you take out the air defense, and you just got free reign to absolutely nobble whatever you can across Crimea. Talk about that a little bit later. So 485 drones is an awful lot. That'll be referring to do we have that larger number 2 nights ago? I didn't think we had. Anyway, that's a very heavy number there. 5 tanks, because there wasn't that many last night. And like I've told you before, it cuts off middle of the night before to the middle of the night last night to give you these stats. 5 tanks is quite a few tanks, considering we are seeing 0, 1, that kind of number quite often. So 5 is all right, although it's half the daily average, but the daily average goes right back to the beginning of the war, and there were many more tanks being used in previous months than now. Troop carrying AFVs at 0. I think that tells you a lot. 53 artillery systems is right up again. That's over double the daily average. That's very significant, and I think indicates that the Ukrainians just don't stop in trying to take out these heavy mortars, artillery systems, towed and self-propelled guns and whatnot. And you can add to that 2 multiple launch rocket systems, which kind of fall into that category anyway. So I think a fairly good day for very good day for the Ukrainians, really, when you include the aircraft and the helicopter put onto that list. Okay, just one bit of personnel data here, really. A 30-year-old Indian, this is an anecdote, but it's kind of reflected. We hear about these an awful lot. A 30-year-old Indian flew to St. Petersburg on a student visa to attend university, but got press ganged into the Russian military and sent to invade Ukraine instead, reports the Times of India. This is a recurring issue. The Indian government has demanded that Indians are returned from the battlefield to India. This has happened previously. I think it was something like 26 of them were returned to India at some point because it became a bit of a public embarrassment. Now, evidently, it is still occurring as students are being press ganged, and it's, I think, representative of the desperation that the Russians are in with getting boots on the ground. We hear these conflicting stories about how they're amassing troops, 300,000. They've been recruiting. The recruitment's been absolutely fine. They've been stockpiling troops. They're going to attack in a major way somewhere. And then, on the other hand, we hear Zelensky and many other analysts going, they're struggling to get recruitment numbers achieved, with the Centre for Countering Disinformation saying 37,900 troops in Q2. That's 3 months worth. That's 12,500 a month. That's not at replacement level. So you've got 2 narratives going on here. One, they got plenty of troops. Another narrative saying no, they don't have enough troops. Then you add things like this. So it's been reported that Ukrainian forces have re-entered Oleksivka up in the Sumy region. Quote, the armed forces of Ukraine have installed flags on Oleksivka in Sumy region and are restoring control there. That's the 225th Assault Brigade. showing that the Russians are under the cosh here and they are not pushing forward. In fact, there were net gains for the Ukrainians yesterday, according to some on the front line, something like 1.3 square kilometers or something like that, indicating that the Russians might be under some pressure here, which again, you've got to try and fit that together with either narrative. This is called abductive reasoning, the inference to the best explanation in philosophy. So, you have three types of, just to do a bit of philosophy very quickly, because this is what we're doing here. Every day I'm trying to kind of add evidence here to bring about justified conclusions. So how do we justify conclusions? So you can use induction, which is like evidence, and probability essentially, but I've seen 1,000 white swans, no black swans, therefore all swans are white. Yeah, but occasionally you come across this situation where okay, there are black swans, you just haven't seen them. But what we try and do is build up a probability based on our observations. That's your scientific way of going through things. That's induction, and that's what we're doing a lot of here. We're speculating based on the evidence that we have seen previously. It's not always going to be perfect. Occasionally we're going to find a black swan, but we have got good justification. The other one is deduction, whereby you you have a syllogism. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, we're not really using that here. That's kind of a basis of logical thinking, but we're not so much doing deduction. The other one is abduction, which is the inference to the best explanation. So, you have these different theories. In this case, Russia has stockpiled a load of troops, or Russia is struggling to get troops. And we look at data and we say, well, which one is best inferred by the data that we're looking at? So that's your inference to the best explanation. And I'm trying to do that an awful lot here, which is to say, okay, there are multiple claims. So for example, one we have the claim that the Ukrainian stats are false, and the Russian trolls will come on and say, blah, 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 these are false. And then I spend all, the last 3 years, I've been going through the data every day in this first section to say, well, are we justified in believing this? Either these are false, these are massively false. I mean, I'm being quite digital here. They are completely true or massively false. Actually, the reality is going to be somewhere in the middle, but towards which end is it going to be? Let's put it into two pots. So what's the best explanation? Well, for the data that we see. So then we go through all this data and say, well, actually, you got loads of stuff being blown up here. You got this and that's happening. We know that they've got a process for submitting this data, that it isn't just plucked out their posteriors like the Russian stats when occasionally they are released. They appear to be complete propaganda. These do appear to be largely accurate, and that's what I try and do on a daily basis. The process we're going through is a fairly philosophical process here. This is a use of induction and abduction to form justified opinions. My whole life is about having opinions that are justified by one of those three things, or hopefully all of those three things in different ways. Deduction, induction, and abduction. So to add to this, we have Oleksivka. So we've just seen the claim for the 225th saying they are taking back Oleksivka. We have the idea that the Russian forces aren't being thrown into this area. They've actually taken forces from here to pull them down to Prokrovsk. So again, how does that fit? Inference to the best explanation. What data? What hypothesis is best supported by this evidence? And then we have Sumy region, Oleksivka, where we're talking about Russians claim that at least 400, so the Russians themselves are claiming that 400 servicemen from the 155th Separate Guards Marine Brigade, so Naval Infantry Brigade Marines, the crack troops, they were absolutely rinsed in several places along the front line. They've been reconstituted something like over maybe a dozen times now. Then they've been fighting up in Sumy. They've been absolutely hammered there. And I think they've been brought down, some of them have been brought down to Prokrovsk as well to help out there. These guys lost 400 servicemen from June to July alone, according to Russian sources. And then you see, visual evidence of them getting, hammered and whatnot. So that's according to Yuri Butasov, who's a very, again, we go to induction, which is, right, Yuri Butasov has been really accurate every time he's spoken previously. So are we justified in believing him this time? Again, you can use Bayesian probability analyses or whatever. We can get very geeky about this. But the idea is and he's been critical of Ukraine when he's seen it as necessary to do so. He doesn't hold back. and he's an accurate reporter. So, again, we are, whether we understand it or not, whether we conscious or not of what we're doing, our brains are consistently doing these analyses based on, different epistemological frameworks. The philosophy of knowledge and truth. Anyway, Ukrainian Su-27s are hitting the Russians in the north here. Don't know exactly where, but with GBU-62 guided glide bombs on a location of an entire unit in the north, claims Sonyashnik. So this is a very significant strike, and I think it was Reporting from Ukraine has just done a video about how the Ukrainians are using their aviation to absolutely hammer the Russians at the moment. Now, Reporting from Ukraine has a tendency to be fairly positive about what Ukraine is doing. So, take that with a pinch of salt and again, feed that into how we understand the claims and whatnot. But when you see like entire huge buildings like this, it's huge building as in the amount of footprint that building has, and if that has a unit of Russian troops in, that building is no more. So to claim that an entire unit has been taken out here, we don't have direct evidence of that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that is indeed true. So just to give you the video here for Reporting from Ukraine, we finally got the upper hand, owning the sky, no air defense, total air superiority. Ukrainians destroy all frontline radars and air defense. Now, I've been reporting on this happening particularly in Crimea, down at the bottom there, but it has been happening back into, as you can see from this kind of not accurate infographic, you get the sense of it. It has been happening back in Rostov and up into Volgograd region, etc., and no doubt also in occupied areas. Now, the aviation appears to be, as we have seen over the last few months, appears to be gaining, confidence to strike an awful lot more right along the front, and they're probably getting more planes. Like, they definitely have more F-16s than they had 2 years ago, right? I mean, objectively, because they didn't have them at all. Now they have F-16s that are gaining more. Belgium is supposedly getting all of their F-16s to Ukraine by the end of the year. And I presume they're getting enough guided glide bombs. The French are still producing their guided glide bombs to hammer AASM. They're getting a variety from the US, and they're making their own too. So, I think we can build up this understanding that Ukrainians probably are using their aviation more effectively than they have been during this war. Now, the question for me would be, how much are the Russians using their aviation? Are they still operating? Because last month, I think it was, we had some data that suggested that they had upped their guided glide bomb usage again. So, it's not just about what Ukraine is doing, it's about understanding the comparison. Right, Andrew Perpetua said Rubij, a Ukrainian unit, is doing extraordinarily important work west of Pokrovsk. Here in this video, which is part of a fundraiser to buy more drones, they show how much fiber optic cable is laid through the fields, an incredible amount. So let's just watch this and look carefully at the glistening on the fields here to give you an understanding of the prevalence of fiber optics. I've shown you similar videos before, but look over here on the right hand side, just the entire fields here, and going up here, all of the fields are crisscrossed with just a tremendous amount of fiber optic cabling. This is obviously going to be an environmental challenge after the war is over, but right now I think it's mainly indicative of the sheer volume of fiber optic drones that both sides are using in order to get around electronic warfare challenges. It's a countermeasure that has, as of yet not been adapted to enough. So, yes, you can try and cut the fiber optic cabling. That is an option. But realistically, it's about intercepting drones, because I don't think it's going to be easy to have any kind of tech wizardry that can take out the fiber optic communications. Right, Anton Gerashenko reports that here's some more context on the Ukrainian strike on the Russian Nebo-U radar station. So remember, from 2 nights ago, there was, well, actually 3 nights ago, but 2 mornings ago, the report was that there were 3 aircraft lost. That's what it talks about. But added onto that was a radar. right? A NEBO radar, which is worth $100 million. Now, here's some more context on the Ukrainian strike on the Russian NEBO-U radar station in Russian-occupied Crimea yesterday, said Gerashenko. Even if this radar was only partly damaged, this has huge significance and is a disadvantage for Russian air defense. Due to its location in Crimea, the NEBO-U radar station can monitor the situation in the sky in a very wide range, including aerial targets, not just in parts of Ukraine, Odessa, Dnipro, Kropyvnytsky, Kiev, Kharkiv, but also outside Ukraine as well. NATO's largest base in Romania, I always pronounce it incorrectly, Chisinau, the coast of Turkey, Istanbul, Ankara, etc. It is also a very rare radar. Russia's only got dozens of them. So again, we're going back to the kind of owning the sky position of reporting from Ukraine here. Damaging one of these radars is a loss for Russia. It increases reaction time for Russian air defense and creates blind or blinder spots. Russian leadership has turned Crimea into a spot for destroying rare and expensive equipment. They've set up a trap for themselves. They cannot stop defending the occupied Crimean peninsula, but they are not able to provide security for their defense systems. A review of the NEBO-U radar station by a Russian defense export company posted 3 years ago, and then he goes on to detail that. I think he details that on the on his original Twitter thread. But point being here, we don't need to go into the details there. Point being that when you see the odd radar like this getting taken out here, and then a few days later there, and then another one over here, these are hugely significant strikes. And the Primari group in Crimea has just been doing this routinely for months and months and months, to the point where I'm positive that Ukraine is soon just going to have fairly free rein to strike all sorts of things in Crimea. I think realistically that's kind of what they're doing at the moment. It might be down to the availability of the drones themselves. So they use, I couldn't work out what drone they were using yesterday, but it was evidently a medium range, fairly large warhead drone that is capable of striking, at these distances and destroying equipment effectively. But I couldn't work out the shape of it, because there were two. There was one that was, filming going into Crimea and going towards one of these seaplanes or whatever, and you saw another one of the drones in the footage that was going in the same direction. I couldn't work out the shape of it. Anyway, I could work out the shape. I didn't know. I have not seen a one-way attack drone look that shape before. Russian forces use drones with real-time tracking to pursue civilians and drop explosives directly on them, say UN investigators. The commission found these strikes constitute crimes against humanity and with a clear purpose of spreading terror among the population. So it's still involved in war crimes. The Russians double tapping, hitting civilians, hitting the emergency services. Terrible stuff. Unconfirmed reports from Russian media suggest, and I reported this yesterday, but it's still there, hasn't been confirmed or disconfirmed yet, that the Kherson collaborator Saldo may have been killed in a strike on the so-called FSB Dacha in Crimea. Sources claim he was at the site during the attack and has not been in contact since Sunday, while the occupation administration is trying to locate him. So it would be a pretty high-ranking political killing that would. So we'll have to wait and see. Right, then we're on to distant strikes. So there were 3 missiles as well that are not counted on this. They may have taken place after this was compiled as an infographic. So 3 missiles, none of them were shot down. This is about 90% interception rate, 103 out of 115 one-way attack drones. That's fairly decent. Yeah, overnight, Russia launched 3 Iskander missiles there as well. 115 attack drones, about 60 of them were Shaheds. So not always Shaheds. You're going to get different types of drones, like the Gerbera. Some of them will be decoys. Some of them will be reconnaissance. Ukraine's air defense has shot down and suppressed 103 missile and drone strikes, hit 6 locations with debris falling in 8 more. That's no reports there. Here is Tim White with his thread. I'm just going to redo this thread. So yesterday started and ended with attacks on Zaporizhia so there is a couple of posts. But first to Odessa region, and photos from a missile attack I wrote about right at the end of Monday night's thread. So Odessa was evidently hit by one of those Iskander missiles. I don't know that it's hit anything particularly meaningful there, at least not from those images, but that's just one. There were 3 missiles sent and none of them were intercepted. A 60-year-old woman died in a ballistic missile attack at Tatar Bunari. Two men were injured. Officials say Russia attacked leisure facilities, destroying and damaging 3 more, while other businesses and houses were also affected. Of course, this will have a commercial impact. This will affect the local economy. Tatar Bunari is about 120 kilometers from Odessa, so it's actually not too close, but the regional capital also suffered damage, probably from falling debris. Cleaning up and repairs are already underway at 9 apartment buildings in the Kievsky district of Odessa. So that's happening there. What else do we have? Just one main street in Kiev is going to be shut at 1 minute to 9 every morning now, and traffic will be stopped so people can pay their respects to the fallen in Ukraine. So that is happening. That's the first time this morning that's happened. So there was Zaporizhia was targeted yet again. I say yet again. It is being routinely, absolutely shellacked at the moment. At the end of the thread last night, says Tim Wright, I wrote that it was feared a man had died in Zaporizhia. It's now been confirmed. 6 aerial bombs also flattened part of the city with many homes and 2 businesses affected. Another video from Zaporizhia, this time from inside one of the flats, still standing but badly damaged as Russian glide bombs that smashed into the city hit for a second consecutive night. Causing a lot of damage. What else do we have? Just seeing if there's any more on the missile and drone attacks. As usual, incredible amounts of explosions, damage almost non-stop in free Donetsk. So this is Druzhkivka. You've got Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, all of these getting absolutely hammered. Konstantinivka, big time. This is from Druzhkivka, where an apartment owner's windows have been smashed after a drone crashed into the building. In neighbouring tower blocks, you can see how much more damage was done. Nearby in Konstantinivka, the situation continues to deteriorate and Frontline gets closer. Evacuation teams still work. Hear the frustration as they came to help a grandfather, leave the embattled town, but he didn't show up, presumably changing his mind. This is quite common, where you have these meet points to go, and which is very risky for these evacuation personnel. I mean, you've seen what's happened to Eddie, for example, working for base UA. I want to interview Eddie. He lost, as a British volunteer that did this stuff, he lost an arm and a leg when his van was targeted. So this is dangerous for the evacuators. And then when an evacuee doesn't turn up to a prearranged meeting site, you've put your life on the risk to help these people out. And of course, they're old, they're vulnerable. Quite often the last people left in are most likely the oldest and the most vulnerable and the most likely to do things like that. So it's definitely challenging. Kirovohrad region as well, infrastructure was attacked there. Judging by delays to trains, it seems the railways were hit again. Fortunately, no casualties there. And then it's on to sort of Russian issues. So we have imagery coming out from Zaporizhia where it was attacked, said so the second night in a row. It's actually more than the second night in a row. It has been routinely hammered over this last week, particularly. Konstantinivka in Donetsk region, we've already been talking about, but Anton Gerashenko has a video of patrol officers rescuing a couple who were trapped in an apartment after a Russian airstrike. The apartment door was pinned by a concrete slab. The officers used a crowbar to bend the door and free the people underneath. On the same day, another 4 citizens and their pet were also rescued in similar sorts of fashions. So, pretty incredible footage coming out routinely from Ukraine as these people do heroic tasks to save as many as they can. So here we have an elderly couple saved when they were trapped under huge bits of rubble and under a door even. Okay, so on to these sort of drones and the drone strikes that we see. Russian Gerber drones, as you can see in this image, now have, as you indicated by this film, 2 rear-facing cameras, or can have 2 rear-facing cameras. The Russians are actively seeking ways to protect their Gerber and Shahed drones from interceptors. The cameras were likely designed to detect an approaching drone and signal Gerber to perform an evasive maneuver. In this case, it didn't work. I have wondered, and someone did answer me in a thread sometime back, I wonder how useful that is, because I would assume an evasive maneuver from a bigger drone. You can see those cameras right there. So two back-facing cameras, one facing more directly up and another other facing diagonally back. I'll try and pause it there and show you. But the idea would be an evasive maneuver here is, there you go, is something that a big drone can do, but it's going to just bank left, bank right, really. That's or dip straight down. These interceptor drones are more, I guess, versatile, more agile than the drones that they're chasing. They've got a shorter range. They're not huge. Sometimes they're quadcopters, sometimes they're fixed wing. But I would have thought that it's an inevitability. If you've been found by an interceptor drone, I just wonder how successful evasive maneuvers can be on a larger drone like this. As you can see here, it was unable to. So if this is a regular setup for a drone, this Gerber drone, if that's a regular setup, then I presume you're going to adapt to that, saying, well, actually, it's probably got a wide angle lens, maybe at pointing back there, but if we approach from the side more than from above and come down on it as they used to, if it's directly from behind or from the side, maybe, I'm sure there are adaptations to these measures, countermeasures, countermeasures, etc. Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks for that. So my fight, and I know I can mute. I know how to deal with this. Please don't tell me how to deal with this. This is a fight I have, and I've been having for 3.5 years, and I love still having the fight, and especially since I'm always winning at the moment. I've not been caught out by the music. I go onto another tab, thinking it's a new tab I'm on that's doing with the music, and it's just started on the previous tab. I've lost this one. I've lost this battle, but I think I'm winning the war. I know all the different ways I can stop this from happening. I'm not interested. I love the fight, and sometimes I like losing. Sometimes I like to be reminded that it's not always just a one-way street with fighting the music on the tabs and these videos. Anyway, since yesterday evening, Russian air defense has been active, and actually it's still active. So this is a video that's just coming out this morning of drones still being in the air in the Moscow region. Anyway, that's apparently, indicating that their drones are still operating in the Moscow region. And they were all yesterday, kind of afternoon, evening. Since yesterday evening, so here talking about evening, Russian air defense has been active against Ukrainian drones in the Moscow region. Traces of air defenses can be seen in the air. In Sheremetyevo airport, lots of incoming flights are delayed or cancelled. That's really been affecting the air industry yet again. Now, it doesn't seem like, well, at least there's no evidence of any success of these strikes, and they have been taking place, last night, this morning, going for Moscow. On the way to Moscow is an oblast called Kaluga Oblast, and the Ukrainians have hit some S-400 radars and launches there. Claims that some were hit yesterday, claims that might have referred to earlier this month strikes on them, but nonetheless they appear to be clearing a way to attacking Moscow, and this could be one of the results of that. But of course, Moscow, it will have some of the very best Russian air defenses littered around it. We've seen pictures of pantsers on top of buildings and all sorts. So I do wonder about what they're trying to achieve by doing this. Whether this could, because these drones are expensive. They're not cheap. Okay, they're cheaper than equivalents that other countries make. They're doing this at a snip, but they're still going to be expensive. So if you're using £800,000 drones, $100,000 drones, then that you're getting up to $1 million a night or something. So you need to make sure you're getting a return on your investment. But of course, what this does, I guess, is that even if they don't hit anything meaningful, the Russians are panicking. They are saying, right, they're sending up air defense missiles, expensive air defense missiles, doing what the Russians do to Ukraine, right, in Kiev and places. But then they are feeling the need maybe to draw air defense systems to their capital. With each passing week, the Russians are having fewer and fewer air defense systems. Look at what's happening in Crimea, right? So they have X amount of air defense systems, or they had X amounts a couple of years ago. What have they got now? What are they having each successive, what are their totals each successive week and month? And where do they place them? Then now they've lost them in Crimea. Crimea is going to get battered. Do they move some air defense systems from Moscow down to Crimea? So then the Ukrainians go, oh, let's hit Moscow, or at least let's try and hit Moscow. We're not actually really too bothered whether we hit anything, because it's about keeping the air defense systems around Moscow and letting people panic there. Meanwhile, they can't replace the systems that they're losing in Crimea, and we just go to town on Crimea. So what's happening in Moscow may look unsuccessful, but it might actually mean that Crimea gets no air defense systems. It's that kind of thing. Anyway, indeed, what happened last night, this was a very real consequence of hitting Moscow with drones, or attempting to hit Moscow with drones. This cargo plane had to fly just above the skyscrapers of Moscow, because flying any higher and it would have been confused with drones and hit by air defense. So this is a very important ramification. Amid a swarm of Ukrainian drones flying over Moscow suburbs, a cargo plane had to descend dangerously low to avoid getting mistakenly shot down by Russian air defenses. So that's what's happening. Although, no battle damage assessment of successful strikes there. Now, air raid alerts are going off in Kazan and Yelabuga right now. Yelabuga is, of course, where the Shahed drones are manufactured. And also, we're hearing a number of other, Yaroslavl, I think, as well, and a number of other places. Air alerts are going off right as we speak. So the Ukrainians are up to something today, it appears. And they've been up to something in Crimea, as mentioned. So this is coming from... I don't know where this originally came from. This might be Reuters. I know Reuters have been reporting on stuff like this. No, actually, that's something else. So air defense facilities, says Max 25, and military infrastructure were damaged in the attack on Sunday night in annexed Crimea. On the night of September the 21st, Astra, military facilities were damaged in an attack on annexed Crimea. Astra reported, so we've got 3 areas hit there. 2 drones struck a convoy of a mobile post of the 31st Air Defense Division near the village of Volochayevka and destroyed a radar installation. Another drone exploded and damaged a Pantsir S-1 air defense missile and gun system near Donskoye in Simferopol district. One serviceman was also injured, so Pantsir looks like it's taken out. We can add that on to knowing that the Nebo... I don't know if the destroyed radar in that installation was a Nebo from the other night. Furthermore, the barracks, club, training building and canteen at the 31st Division near the village of Vitino in the Saksky district were damaged in 2 strikes, presumably carried out by a Neptune missile. So, wow, okay. Someone says spending Neptune missiles on barracks is a very questionable decision that borders on treason. These scarce missiles should fly into more significant targets. I don't know that you can know that. If that's a barracks including officers and you are producing more Neptune missiles now than you were, I don't know what the production number of Neptune missiles are, but I'm fairly sure they're not going to be going, oh, yeah, let's just use it on this. Like, I think it's, from randos on the internet to go, yeah, that's bordering on treasonous to use a Neptune missile to do that, when he's reacting to merely like just a sentence from Max 25. No, leave it up to the Ukrainians. I'm sure they're not going to be just spanking Neptunes on hitting. Oh, look, there's a little playground that I saw a soldier on a roundabout once on the satellite image. I think it was Tuesday the 31st of whenever. So let's send a Neptune into that. No, that's not what's happening, right? So, okay. Now, the analyst here says Ukraine pummels air defense networks. Ukrainian drones, HIMARS, and aircraft have been pummeling Russian air defenses both in the tactical and strategic level almost across the entire front line, from Crimea to Kursk. Fixed radars, large node radars, and network multiple launch sites, tactical missiles and vehicles have been hit relentlessly over the past month. These have punched a hole in Russian drone and missile detection capacity and provided Ukrainian tactical aviation a clear path to using bombs and missiles against troops and logistics centres unopposed by Russian fighters. So then we can go back to the reporting from Ukraine video talking about how aviation is having ensuring something of a free reign. Actually, it's probably overselling it, but, certainly doing more than they were. Unopposed by the Russian fighters now deployed way behind the lines, it also removes early warning of drone attacks against oil industry and manufacturing targets, ensuring more of Ukrainian drones and missiles get through. So you might get a situation where when only 2 drones are getting through on, say, a refinery, and you're thinking, oh, and I was complaining, why are they only ever sending 1 or 2 drones here? They're not. They're sending 20 drones to there, but 18 of them are getting taken out. Well, now it might be the case that because of this degradation in occupied territories, in Crimea and up in, say, Kursk, Belgorod and Bryansk, and yada yada, that refineries are going to get less and less forward warning of drones, and therefore instead of 2 drones hitting a refinery, you might get 6 drones hitting a refinery, and that much more damage being done. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Some $500 million worth of radars have been destroyed, along with a similar figure in tactical vehicles for systems like Pantsir. Ukraine is on the cusp of air superiority and extraordinary achievement in wartime, given the state of their air force in 2022. So that's a very bullish analysis from the analyst. Just to add on that yesterday there was imagery that came out of a Russian train in Kenevskaya, Russia. After a substation was hit, a power surge caused the train to catch fire, is the claim here. So this is, I reported a substation being hit. That could be the result of the substation being hit. Here is image, I presume, of exactly that train, although there is foliage and trees around there. Yeah, I presume this is the same train. Yeah, there is overheads as well. It's Kenevskaya. Yeah, of course it is. Consequences of a strike. So Max 25 doesn't really talk about how this happened, but a whole train is burnt down, either from being struck itself or from a substation being hit. Now, I'm going to do a separate video on this just in a minute, but just to let you know that Poland has issued a start warning to Russia in the UN Security Council, warning of any missiles or drones going to Polish airspace. They're going to get taken down. Exactly kind of what Tusk was talking about yesterday. To the representatives of Russia, I want to say this. We know that you do not care about international law and are incapable of living in peace with your neighbours. Your mad nationalism contains a lust for domination and will not fade until you realise that the age of empires is over and that your empire will not be restored. Every drone strike by the heroes of the armed forces of Ukraine, may God bless them, brings that day closer. So Radoslav Sikorski was going to town in the UN. Really strong rhetoric there. And they're going to shoot down Russian drones and jets if they make incursions into Polish airspace. Sweden says it's ready to shoot down intruders. No warning needed. Paul Jonsson, the defense minister, confirmed that the military is authorized to use force under a standing directive. This comes after MiG-31s entered Estonian airspace and drones violated Poland's. Then we hear that Estonia says it's open to hosting British F-35A jets capable of carrying nuclear bombs after 3 Russian MiG-31s violated its airspace last week. NATO is debating rules of engagement with Poland, vowed to shoot down intruders, while Estonia calls for proportionate responses. I think this is brilliant. Like, there's been this critical mass. I think we've got a tipping point, and almost everyone will argue this is way too late. This is like 2 years too late. But finally, NATO has said, right, enough's enough. And yes, good. So we should celebrate this. This is exactly the right kind of response, but that should have happened a couple of years ago. And they've said this and Russia has said nothing. In other words, yeah, we can put red lines to the Russians. We can push the envelope back the Russians' way. And do you know what? They will capitulate because they don't have much other than saber rattling of the nuclear missiles, etc., etc. I was listening to Simon Woodywitz, I met him in Kiev. Jonathan Fink has just interviewed him, and he said a couple of things that are really, really important. One, and I've told you this before, I've heard it from him, but I've heard it from others, and I know people involved. I just know people, that the UK is massively involved in Ukraine. And I think history will shine a very positive light on the UK. He was saying, and he said, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm saying this now. Basically, there's loads of UK troops in Ukraine. and they are doing more than basically any other nation. So, like, as a British person, I am pretty proud that under both governments, we have been committed to Ukraine, and we've been committed in ways that most people don't realise. That's happening under the radar that is very, very important. And there's a lot going on in Ukraine, and Britain is at the heart of it. And he said, I wish other nations were doing this. Now, he's a British person, is he biased? But he's actually involved in security in Ukraine. So he knows an awful lot of people and an awful lot of stuff. And it appears that he is like, I wish other nations could do what the UK is doing. So that was one thing that was interesting. I wasn't going to say that in this video. But the other thing he said is that Russia is really weak, and they aren't going to be able to attack any other nation after Ukraine. They just don't have the ability. And if they did start on NATO, NATO would be able to do what Ukraine can't. And Ukraine would love to just take out the Yellow Booger drone flight. He said, look, if they sent drones against us in Europe, then, so you look at this. So Russia can already launch Shahed drones in Denmark, Germany, and Italy using its existing launch infrastructure. And in the case of deploying sites in Belarus, it can reach Madrid as well. So it's the Defense Express. So they can, hijack the mobile phone masts and whatnot, and they can send drones. And they actually have a range of 1,800 to 2,500, the Grand 2, according to the Ukrainian intelligence. So, the guest on Jonathan Fink was saying, look, what would happen is they'd send drones into Europe. Europe would then spend a lot of money and use expensive missiles to take these drones down. So you have that asymmetry. You're like, oh, you're not ready for this. Oh, we're not prepared for this. But he's like, what would then happen is that NATO would just take out the Yellow Booger site in a way that Ukraine can't. NATO can, and they would just destroy those. They wouldn't be able to build those drones. They would just absolutely shellac the stuff because. And he was very, very explicit in saying the Russian armed forces are absolute dog shit. And he says, like, honestly, they are not very good. The Air Force still isn't great. And the Navy, okay, there are elements of the Navy. But it's just not, it just wouldn't be a comparison. And I agree with this. So there's been all these reports about how if Ukraine fell, or Russia be ready in 3 to 5 years to take this country or that country. I'm like, honestly, it's not going to happen. Ukraine are the buffer between us and that happening. And Ukraine are attriting the Russians at a level that is so beneficial to NATO that I get really freaking frustrated when you get like the American the American political setup just saying, oh, we shouldn't be putting money into supporting Ukraine. You can buy stuff, the Europeans can buy stuff, but the return on investment for the Americans, the amount of equipment they have given to Ukraine is insane, right? The Ukrainians have achieved more in terms of attriting Russia than NATO has been able to even dream of in the last 70 years. Like, it's just insane. So, yeah, go and watch that interview with on Jonathan Fink on Silicon Curtain. Right, so very quickly, last night, Copenhagen, Oslo, so Sweden, Norway and Denmark had drones shutting down airports and breaching airport airspace, and it was all like very controversial. No one quite knows what's going on, although there are reports that unknown drones were spotted over Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. In Copenhagen, they disrupted airports but vanished without being shot down. Oslo's airport also closed, with drones seen over the city centre and a military site. 2 suspects were detained. Unidentified drones flew over Stockholm, and it appears that 2 detainees were I think from Singapore. Drones that forced the temporary closure of Denmark's main airport appeared to have been flown by a capable operator seeking to demonstrate certain abilities, police have said, adding no suspects had been identified. Copenhagen and Oslo airports were shut for hours after drones were observed in airspace, leaving tens of thousands of passengers stranded as flights were diverted. Drones in Denmark came from several directions, their lights turning on and off before eventually disappearing after several hours. Then we hear that 2 foreign nationals from Singapore were arrested in Oslo on Monday evening for flying a drone inside a no-fly zone, including over Akershus Fortress and Opera House, Norwegian police reported. And Denmark hasn't ruled out Russian involvement in suspicious drone sightings. Quote, I cannot rule out that it is Russia, said Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. We have seen drones over Poland that should not have been there. We have seen activity in Romania. We have seen violations of Estonian airspace. So that is very She says it's a serious attack on critical infrastructure. She linked it to wider European tensions, referring to drone incursions, as mentioned in all of those places. It cannot rule out Russia being somewhat involved. Okay, so that's serious stuff. So, but the responses appear to be fairly robust at the moment in terms of the other incursions in Polish airspace from Poland, Estonia, and then Sweden, saying that they're happy to shoot down stuff if needs be. So it's all very tense. Okay, but I'll do a separate video on that later. So on the Security Council, so at the same time that you've got the UN meeting in New York, you've got Russia taking on the Security Council, I think, rotating presidency at the moment, which is insane. At the Security Council meeting, Putin claims, quote, strategic stability continues to degrade. I think this is Security Council in maybe... I don't know exactly the context of this, because this is from yesterday, and announced Russia is abandoning its moratorium. So this is obviously not in New York because he won't go there. Russia is abandoning its moratorium on deploying medium and short-range missiles, calling it a forced step. He warned Moscow is ready to respond to threats with military force, so a little bit of saber rattling there. At the same time, he has given a citizenship to, if you remember, this former Joe Biden aide, Tara Reid. She accused Joe Biden of sexual assault some years ago. It all got very controversial, and obviously the right jumped on it, and it turned out that she was a really discredited witness or person in general, and then she ran away to Russia, and you're like, okay, so it looks like Russia was behind this, and it was not credible at all. She moved to Moscow in 2023, publicly asked Putin for citizenship, and said she faced death threats in the US. Since then, Reid has spoken against support for Ukraine and appeared on Russian propagandist media outlet RT. So you're thinking, yeah, it probably wasn't credible accusations of Joe Biden, and now she's been given citizenship by Putin. My move to Russia was forced, she said, but then I fell in love with the country so much I now want to stay. She said, yeah, a good riddance to you. Now, on the economy, Jakub Janowski from Oric says, I wonder if these prices will affect the official inflation rate and related policies, or whether the regime will just pretend that everything is just fine. And that's in response to diesel fuel prices in Russia continuing to soar. And that's important because we've seen petrol prices previously soaring, or petrol not being available, but the army runs on diesel. So if diesel is affected from the refinery hits, it's mainly been petrol, but if diesel is, then that is an even bigger problem for the Russian armed forces. And we're hearing that they are saying, I reported the other day, a Russian source saying diesel is now being rationed in the army. Diesel prices, fuel prices in Russia continue to soar, so supply demand, this will be a supply issue. Today, plus 2%, but over the last 8 days, 10% increase. So that is something to look out for. Now, Russia faces fuel shortages as Ukrainian strikes cut refining by up to 20%. This is from Reuters. This is one that's from Reuters. And exports drop. And A92 and A95 types of fuel are scarce in the Far East, Crimea, Volga, South and Central regions. Many private gas stations, 40% of the market, are closing. Officials say it's temporary, but traders call it systemic. These are canaries in the coal mine. Now, a Chinese vessel has docked in the Russian-occupied Crimea in Sevastopol, despite sanctions, according to the Financial Times. According to the Ukrainian authorities, a vessel has moored in Sevastopol at least 3 times in recent months. So it's a Chinese sanction. They shouldn't be allowed to do that, but it's breaking the rules to do that, the FT has reported. Now, they've actually brought out this interesting little flash thing, this kind of GIF type thing. So the ship is photographed leaving Istanbul on September the 2nd. It's caught by satellite in Novorossiysk on September the 6th. The vessel's transponder has suggested, according to the transponder transmissions, the vessel then sails to Port Kavkaz, which is by the Kerch Strait, but 2 satellite passes on September 9th and 11th do not see it where it is supposed to be. So in other words, its transponder might have been dropped off at Port Kavkaz. A vessel then appears to be the Hengyang 9, is, however, sighted on satellite photos on September the 14th in Sevastopol, right over the other side of Crimea. Around this time, the ship claimed to be sailing south from Port Kavkaz. If this were true, a satellite would have seen it on September the 15th, but it is missing. So there appears to be some transponder shenanigans. At some point before it reaches Istanbul, the ship's transmitted position starts to then match with the real position. So satellite and transponder matches up. When it finally arrives on September the 17th, the containers on the deck are in the same arrangement as the ones sighted in Crimea, in Sevastopol. In other words, it is fully like breaking international sanctions, and a Chinese vessel has gone to Sevastopol, loaded up with something or dropped off something or both, and that's that. So what is going on? That needs to be sorted out. Now, Russia's shadow fleet comprises 17%, that's 1 in 6 of the world's oil tankers are Russian shadow fleet tankers. It allows Moscow to bypass Western sanctions and keep war funding flowing, says the New York Times. The 940 aging vessels operate by using fake insurance, flying flags from third countries and transmitting false location data, as we just seen. The shadow fleet exploded in size after Europe banned Russian oil imports in 2022 due to the full-scale war in Ukraine, forcing Moscow to find new buyers in India and China and avoid the $60 per barrel price cap imposed by Western nations. Poorly maintained tankers are already causing oil spills across the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, with experts warning of potential environmental catastrophe. The EU has blacklisted over 500 shadow fleet ships and plans its 19th sanctions package, but enforcement remains difficult as vessels continue flag hopping and transferring cargo at sea to hide their identities, so on and so forth. Now, Russia has cited air safety in a bid to lift international aviation sanctions. So they are sanctioned, can't get spare parts. Aviation industry is absolutely tanking, and they're saying, look, it's your fault if something drops out the sky. It's your fault for not allowing us to have spare parts, rather than Russian aviation's fault for flying irresponsibly flying planes that are dangerously poorly maintained, right? So, you know, absolutely ridiculous. Reuters reported on the 22nd that Russia is pressing the UN Civil Aviation Agency to lift sanctions on the shipment of aircraft parts and overflights, warning that they allegedly threaten air safety. Russia is urging the UN Civil Aviation Agency to ease sanctions on spare parts and overflights, yet dismissing its response to the war in Ukraine as, quote, unlawful coercive measures. A young Ukrainian from occupied Donetsk Oblast has been sentenced to 16.5 years for social media post. A social media post in prison for 16.5 years. Yeah, that's what freedom looks like in Russia. It ain't free. There's no freedom there. Now, just to remind you, I did a breaking news update this morning on OAN, the right-wing news media outlet from the US, going to Donbass, being given permission by the Russian authorities to do so, reporting from there, getting Russian propaganda, and then splurging that Russian propaganda on both RT, Russia Today, and then on their own OAN. It's disgusting. It's despicable. Watch out for the information spaces on the right really trying to align themselves with Russia. It's disgusting. And I said to you in that same video as well, also remember, I know that there's a lot of desire to be really nice about Charlie Kirk because he was assassinated, and that was horrible, and he shouldn't have been killed, obviously, but it doesn't stop him also being I would go as far as to say a bad person, and I think this is about as good an indication of his moral evaluation as you can get. So Volodymyr Zelensky said, thank you, America. Thank you for your support. Thank you for this visit. Thank the POTUS, Congress, and the American people. Ukraine needs just and lasting peace, and we're working exactly for that. The response from Charlie Kirk was, we don't support you. Show some respect next time. You're an ungrateful, petulant child who is responsible for 1 million dead. So Charlie Kirk held Volodymyr Zelensky responsible for 1 million people dying. John Jackson said, I remember when Charlie Kirk peddled Russian propaganda to facilitate their genocide of Ukrainian women and children. He absolutely knew that he was lying in this ridiculous statement. This is how I will remember him. He says, a representable person who was a traitor to American values. So just remember that. It's very easy to jump on this, oh, I feel sorry for Charlie Kirk and his family for the horrors that happened to him. Yes, but we need to differentiate these two things. We can hold both that it was disgusting what happened to him and feel sorry for his family for being without a father and without a husband. But he also peddled despicable Russian disinformation. And that is unacceptable. And what OAN did is unacceptable. Now, all that negativity leaves a funny taste in my mouth, so I'm going to try and leave you on a positive note. We've seen Russian donkeys being used to transport equipment around the front lines. This one's been saved by a Ukrainian soldier, and look how appreciative the donkey is of the Ukrainian soldier here. It's lovely. He's loving it. Tail wagging, ears up. I don't know if the soldier's like, come on, man, I'm getting frustrated. I'm trying to do my job. I've got war to do. This donkey keeps following me. Anyway, he saved the donkey by all accounts. It's just beautiful. I love it. So, bit of positivity there. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.